So
Good, good.
awesome. Yeah. Thanks for joining me again.
No problem. Glad to be here. Glad
Yeah.
to talk to you.
Yeah. You've had a very busy year. So
Uh,
how's that been?
it's been crazy. It's been
Yeah.
it keeps getting busier and busier, and I'm not on sabbatical anymore. I'm back at work at the university. Uh,
Okay. So
I
couldn't
got
get more so.
yeah, I got my tenure, so that was good news.
Nice. Congrats.
Thank you. But yeah, so it's been uh, yeah, the last month and a half month and a half has been particularly busy because, like I said. All the online stuff has been heating up dramatically. And then I'm back teaching 4 courses at the university. So I'm very,
Okay.
very busy. Yeah.
Yeah.
How have things been for you?
I've been good. Yeah. Just still working on my videos. I'm going to be traveling on Thursday. So going to be doing a cross country trip, and I'm really excited for that. Yeah, it's going to be a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything's been good. Yeah.
I saw
Um,
you released one not that long ago that I wasn't aware of, the one on mindfulness and Buddhism.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't see that one?
No, I didn't. I don't know how it slipped through, but I'll tweet about that and post about that so people know
Oh,
about it.
awesome. Yeah, that was I think as of right now that's going to be my last one. Like I'd love to do the rest. It's just a lot goes into it. So
No,
yeah,
no, I get it. I get it.
yeah.
Well, thank you for what you did. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think
just
when I started doing that series, all that was out there was the Buddhism and cognitive science lectures from years ago.
yeah,
There was not that many people were watching them, so I wanted to like just basically get them out there. And then now I love how much attention is getting. So
yeah.
I think it's,
Awakening. Yeah, you mean awakening from the meaning crisis? Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's been that's been really gratifying and exciting of the level of interest that has it's generated. So I've been very appreciative of that and very grateful for that.
yeah. What did it feel like when you released that final?
But when I released the final video, um, that's a good
Was it
question.
a relief or
Um, I was, there was relief for sure. There was there was some sadness. It was like it was a project I'd been with for so long, and I also knew that I was going to be not seeing the crew anymore, and we had been working together for a long time. And then there
right?
was also a bit of like, what's next? Almost like after I got my PhD, like what's next?
Yeah,
So that was very much the case. What am I going to do next? What I'm going to work on next? So
yeah. I don't know. That's funny. Kind of sounds like the martial arts thing too, where people they work all their life to get the black belt, and then they're like, I feel like I just started. It's like there's so much
yeah,
more to do.
yeah. I mean, there is. So I'm working on some new series. So there's 3 projects on the work right now. Um, and so they're all, I mean, some of them are going to start very soon, and then there's another one that's going to start a little bit later in the summer. So yeah, I mean, I haven't lacked for things, new projects to undertake. I've taken three new ones on right now. So
Yeah. So there's a new series called After Socrates, right?
right. So what's going to happen? So what's happening is I was originally going to release After Socrates at the end of February, but 2 things came. There was a sort of some funding opportunities that I'm working on. So I'm going to try and apply for those, and that means I'm going to delay releasing After Socrates. And
Okay.
secondly, I just keep diving deeper and deeper into this topic, and I'm doing more and more participant observation and research. And so I also want more time to sort of work on the quality. So I'm going to release After Socrates probably towards the end of July. In the interim, there's 2 new series. I've got one that's starting very soon. We're filming some of it, I think this Friday or Saturday. It's called Minding Media. Basically, I'm going to take a movie and do like a 15-minute sort of essay on sort of issues connected to wisdom, meaning, the meaning crisis, as exemplified in the movie, and then have sort of a discussion with a couple other people, a roundtable discussion of it, to try and bring these topics into a little bit more accessible format for
Okay.
people.
Yeah,
And
that sounds
then,
great.
yeah, oh, thanks. And then there's another one that's going to be starting shortly. We haven't quite have a name for it. I've got several videos filmed on this, is where I'm going to have discussions with people, sort of around the topic of sort of science, and spirituality and wisdom cultivation. What does that mean for us now today? And so
Hmm.
I'm getting into in-depth conversations with people. And part of that is not just the content, but what I also want to do with that series is start to exemplify as much as I can the process of dialogue and dialogos and Socratic conversation that I'm going to be taking up and discussing at length and after Socrates.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that kind of, I guess, ties in with that participatory knowing, like you're
Very,
actually acting it out.
yeah, very
Yeah.
much. Very much.
So how do you usually approach these lectures? Do you have them like scripted out to a T, or do you have like a general idea and then just kind of flow with with
I sort of in between. So generally, I have a sort of a schematic structure for the lecture, and sort of the skeleton of the core argument. But then I leave a lot of room for sort of flow and jazz to come out, and that when that happens, that's for me where it's particularly joyful.
yeah. Because I mean, I get into a flow state just taking notes on them, so I can't imagine the flow state you get giving the lectures.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so one of the things I've tried to cultivate as a teacher is to sort of regularly and reliably get into the flow state while I'm teaching. That was a little trickier when I was doing the series because one of the things that helps me get into the flow state when I'm teaching is there's other people there, and you get the interaction and the resonance.
Yeah.
When I was filming, there was nobody in the room, and it was
Oh,
just the
there
crew. And
wasn't. Okay.
yeah, so
Because
there's nobody in the room. It's just the crew, and they're maintaining camera face so that they don't, distract me or anything. So it was kind of a ghostly dialogue. I had to try to imagine an audience there. It was very
yeah, that's
challenging.
funny. Because yeah, I actually couldn't tell if there was an audience there or not, so I wasn't sure. So you're doing a good job of talking as if there
Oh,
was.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously like ideas like flow, ritual, and knowing through participation are very important in your work. And then
Yeah.
you talk a lot about martial arts. Have like a meditation practice or like other ways of incorporating this into your life?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, that's some of the work I'm doing towards the ecology of practice. I have a meditative practice, I have a contemplative practice, I have a practice that integrates them together. I have a moving mindfulness practice, Tai Chi Chuan, some Fijin and Qigong practices surrounding that. I have a Lectio Divina practice. I'm part of a circling practice. No, all of this stuff I'm talking about, I'm actually also,
Yeah,
I,
living
I'm
it.
yeah, living it very much, and trying to figure out how to work these things together. I also have an active open-mindedness practice where I note biases during the day and journal about them at night. I do dream work and journaling and bring that. So yeah, I have a whole bunch of ecology, practices, and I try to set them into, an ecology where there's self-correcting and mutually benefiting and affording each other, mutually constraining each other. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm curious how you do the dream work, because it's something I've gotten into and it's very difficult to stick with. But there are some interesting insights. I wonder like how do you or what is your approach to it?
So, I mean, I had the benefit of I actually went through Jungian therapy. Like, I went to a therapist
Hmm.
at a point in my life when I was stuck. I was doing it both because for existential reasons I was stuck, but also for, I guess, academic reasons because I wanted to understand Jung's practice and worldview from the inside. I also did a whole bunch of workshops around it with the person who was my therapist. I read some of his books, George Slater. He's got a really excellent book called Bringing Dreams to Life. And so the basic thing there, is to first of all just get into the habit of doing the dream work, keeping a journal beside your bed. Well, first thing when you do, wake up in the morning, try to remember your dreams, record it.
Right.
Do some lucid dream inductions, not because you might have that many lucid dreams, but the act of, the things, the reality checks throughout the day and other things. And when you go to sleep at night, I'm going to remember my dreams. I'm going to try and realize that I'm dreaming. Like I said, you'll get some lucid dreaming out of that, and that's interesting. But regardless of whether or not you get the lucid dreaming, the act of trying to bring lucidity into the dreaming, you'll get, because that's on a continuum, all the way from a full blown lucid dream to not being aware at all. But
Hmm.
what will tend to happen is it'll move you on that continuum. And even if you don't go fully lucid, you're much more likely to remember the content of your dreams if you try to bring some lucidity induction practices into it.
Right. Yeah, that is something I noticed. Like even just writing them down,
Yeah,
I would actually remember my dreams a lot more. And then as soon
sure.
as I stopped, it was like you
Go
just
away. They go
completely
away.
forget
Yep,
them.
yep, yep.
Yeah. So just something about that, like setting the intention in your mind to remember it. Like I don't know, activate something.
Yeah, and seeing, I mean, and getting into the habit of taking a look at your journal when you first wake up. I buy something that is different from all of my other notebooks. It has a distinctive look to it, something that's sort of conducive to it's sort of I associate it with a dream state. It has a cover on it like that. All the little mnemonic tricks you can do. And then of course afterwards you can reflect on the dream. You can go through what some of the stuff that George talks about in his book, bringing dreams to life, how to bring in some amplification techniques, some dialogic techniques, looking for patterns across the dreams. But there's quite a few good manuals. I would strongly recommend people taking a course, as I did. I mean, books can help, and like I say, Bringing Dreams to Life is a very good book, but it's really important. This is like meditation or Tai Chi. It's very it's very important at some point to get some, in class instruction with somebody who's practiced at this kind of work.
All
And then
right.
you want to, and you want to get a framework around it. I mean, some people are going to bring in a Jungian framework. The Jungian framework helps. I try to bring in other aspects, cognitive science,
Yeah.
things like that help.
I'm sure it changes on temperament too. Like I've heard if you're very creative, the Jungian approach works very well for you, whereas another approach might work better if you're more,
Yeah.
I don't know, logical maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the overall thing you want to get is you want to get into kind of a dialogical relationship with your unconscious, for lack of a better referent,
Yeah.
uh, because it's that dialogical relationship where you get a sense of an ongoing discussion and dialogue that seems to be, in some ways, the relationship and the process to me is as valuable, if not more valuable, than any sort of messages I get from the particular dreams.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
So
I really think that kind of unconscious nighttime work has to really be seriously balanced with a lot of daytime work, cultivating rationality,
yeah.
insight, reflection. Because if you're doing just the dream work, there's a danger you can sort of spin off, especially autodidactically,
Yeah.
and get into some really challenging and maybe not particularly helpful mental frameworks.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I love in your work, you always kind of balance things out. Like when you
Yes,
talk
very
about
much.
Buddhism and
Yeah.
mindfulness, you talk about dissolving the experience down, but also building it back up.
Yes, 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 very much. That's what I mean about ecology of practices. You want to get practices that complement each other's strengths and weaknesses in a very dynamic, self-correcting manner.
Hmm. So is that, I mean, you obviously talk about psychedelic experiences a lot. Is that one of the, I think you talk about it with a lot of caution, which I think is
Yeah.
rightfully so. Is one of the dangers that you can dissolve your experience down too much and you need to build it back up and integrate it into your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's also the interpretive framework. So you can trigger um, some stuff that's very anomalous from your everyday experience, and that's therefore very, very hard to integrate in a coherent manner. If you don't have a sapiential framework and to bring to bear on it, and a ritual context in which other practices constrain and interact with it, there's a chance in which you can get into some very self-deceptive spirals around what you're seeing, and generate really sort of weird personal metaphysics and ontologies that are probably much less conducive to wisdom that you might sort of think. You can really sort of get into
Yeah.
this pattern of confusing the saliency and the personal psychodynamic relevance of material with it being sort of metaphysically important or profound about the nature of reality. It's very easy to fall into that confusion, and a lot of people do in
Hmm.
in important ways. So, yeah, that's yeah. There's a lot of caution that should be brought to bear uh, on psychedelics. I do argue, as you noted, I do argue very consistently for they should be brought into an existing ecology of practices that have a lot of training in other ways in which we can overcome self-deception, and then they should be practiced within a ritual context. There should definitely be sober people present. Right. You want to try and integrate the psychedelic state with like the correct sort of set and ritual set and setting, so that
Mhm.
you're binding it into a developmental trajectory.
Yeah. So that is one of the main talking points of the psychedelic community is that you need to have the proper set and setting
Yeah.
to have an experience you want. But even if you do it, like you can go to Peru and do it with a shaman and do it with other people, but even still, you have to come home
Yep.
and
Yep.
integrate
That's
it
right.
into your life on your own. And there's most of us don't have people or a culture around us that will help us integrate it into
That's
our
exactly right.
day-to-day framing.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so that can be very, very problematic. I mean, some people do manage to form spontaneous groups in which they basically create a ritual context and they create a dialogical context, so that they can, you know, not get bound up into sort of an egocentric echo chamber with themselves. Uh, and that does happen, and I don't want to deny that does occur, but it's hoping that will happen just by happenstance is I think not a very good strategy overall. I think
Yeah.
making sure that like when you come back there is a sapiential tradition and a trajectory that you belong to, that will really guide you in the integration of this and help you to transform it so it can empower you in in your aspiration to some stable kind of self transcendence.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. And so I've had a number of psychedelic experiences in my life, and they've been some of the most important experiences of my life. But as I've gotten older, grown more and more cautious because I have seen how they've affected people. I've had a good friend who essentially, I believe he's gone schizophrenic, and it's not
Yeah,
directly related to the psychedelic, but it kind of after that, he
yeah,
into a
yeah,
downward spiral of basically thinking he's like a god and a messiah. And so
yeah.
seeing stuff like that is more and more cautious as I get older.
Yeah, you should be. I mean, I think everybody should be cautious right from the beginning. Unfortunately, people the demographic that it gets to be attracted to psychedelics are often people that are aspiring towards maturity and depth, rather than people who are actually got some systematic and reliable way of cultivating it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't want to dissuade people from exploring, but we also want to try and come up with something culturally equivalent to what you see cultures around the world having that make use of these psychedelic states.
Mm-hmm. So then, yeah, just going back to your work, is there any particular moment in your life where you remember these ideas crystallizing, or where you remember realizing that talking about meaning in life was going to be a big part of your life's work?
There was a couple moments when there were separate pieces came. I mean, I remember having a moment where I was talking with Tim Lillicrap, I think, in my office at the University of Toronto, and realizing that I think I had a way of getting at this idea of relevance realization. And then Tim and Blake helped me, and then later Leo Ferraro helped me a lot. And so I remember that moment, and I remember sensing that that was a turning point. And then when I started teaching Buddhism in Kogsai, and I started realizing that I could bring the work I was doing on relevance realization and rationality and wisdom into that, I remember in the first couple of lectures, I started to get a sense of that. I don't know if I have a particular moment, but I think it was like the second or third time I was teaching the course, I started to realize it was kind of like going to be the apex of all of my work. And I remember having that experience, and starting to see both the I guess the pervasiveness and importance of the meaning crisis, but also correspondingly a genuine way in which we might respond to it in a deep manner. And so I don't know if I have a particular moment, but I know there was a time in my life when that came really clear to me.
Right. So, I mean, for people who are watching the lectures and maybe they're in a funk in their life or something like that, and they're listening and they want to implement the things you talk about, is there anything you recommend starting out that people can do?
So I recommend a couple of things. I mean, I've got a couple videos on my channel of how to start meditating that can give you some initial work there. When I start after Socrates in July, each episode will have an instructional component to it on how to actually engage in a practice to bring about this. There's some videos out there that exemplify this kind of dialogos that I'm talking about that are all I've also uploaded to give people an idea about how they might try to get into these authentic dialogue practices with each other.
Mm-hmm.
There are various communities about authentic relating, circling. I'm trying to think. There's quite a few instructional videos. I'm working on some online courses on wisdom through Rebel Wisdom. I'm going to be working on with future thinkers on sort of mindfulness and meditation. So there's going to be some online stuff that's going to be available too.
Okay.
So there's some stuff coming. And very much, I would recommend taking a look at some of the videos. I'm going to be talking to him later tonight with Rafe Kelly and the ecology of practices and the community he's built. He's got an online course that's very valuable. Mark Walsh has a book out that's really important about a lot of this. So there's quite a few resources out there that people can start taking a look at.
Yeah. So does it really just come down to picking one thing, kind of implementing it and starting something and seeing where it goes from there?
Yeah, there is that, and I recommend again that you implement this as a community, not you get a set of people or join an existing community, because I mean this is what the research shows, if you try to implement this on your own as a sort of a lone wolf, it won't last, it won't take, you won't get the
Yeah.
transformation you're seeking. It just doesn't
Right.
happen.
Right. And yeah, I think that's why I love that you reference martial arts so much, because
Yep.
I think it is one of the most and one of the best and most straightforward ways of implementing this kind of participatory knowing that you were talking about.
Very much, yeah, very much. So I'm working with Mike Mann on that. He runs a dojo and about trying to integrate some of this wisdom cultivation into a martial arts practice, because that, of course, is what was the ancient tradition, and trying to revive that and sort of reverse engineer it and bringing it back into the fore for people when they go into his dojo. So we've got sort of an experiment in situ about trying to see how we can actually make that work again.
Yeah, great. What role do you think social media plays in all of this? Because obviously it's this big contributor to anxiety and time
Oh yeah,
wasting,
yeah, yeah.
but it's also allowed you to get your lectures out to thousands of people that never would have seen them.
That's a really good question. So, I mean, I think it is very much a double-edged sword, like you articulated. I mean, there's ways that I've talked about in various other talks and lectures about how social media is exacerbating important aspects of the meaning crisis in powerful ways. But then again, it's afforded the video series, it's afforded these discussions, it's afforded kind of the meta discussions that are happening between all the discussions.
Yeah.
That it's put me into contact with many people that I wouldn't otherwise be in contact with. So I guess it sort of feels to me like a race. It feels to me like there's these two potentials in social media that are racing with each other as to which way. Sorry, this sounds sort of pretentious, but which way social media is going to direct humanity.
Yeah.
Uh, and I
And no one
mean,
really knows. That's you can only look back on it and really, see what role it actually played.
yeah, and I guess I'm doing my best working with lots of people. I had a wonderful meeting with Thomas Bjorgman, and he is again trying to put together a lot of stuff, to redirect how we use the internet and social media. So I want as much as I can to lend my time and talent to that because the other current, if I can call it that, has a lot of corporate power and money and market forces behind it um, that are driving it in very powerful ways. Um, I guess the for lack of a better word, the success of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and related work I see in Rebel Wisdom and Future Thinkers and your work, and what I see Paul Vanderklay doing and Jonathan Pajot and people like that is that it encourages me that there is a lot of momentum also in trying to appropriate and exact social media for bringing back culturally a culture of awakening, as Stephen Batchelor would put it, a culture of wisdom cultivation and of deep and shared responses to the meaning crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love that there's so many people that are able to effectively talk about symbolism, like you and Jonathan Pajot, Jordan
Yeah,
Peterson.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and then let me see. It always kind of you guys talk about it in this sophisticated way, but it always reminds me of the South Park bit where there's this alien invasion, and so they get Jeff Goldblum to come and try and save the world, and he goes on these random tangents.
Wait a minute. Butt sex.
Butt sex?
Butt sex requires a lot of lubrication, right? Lubrication. Chupacabras, the goat killer of Mexican folklore. Folklore is stories from the past that are often fictionalized. Fictionalized to heighten drama. Drama student. Students at colleges usually have bicycles. Binary. It's binary code.
How do you approach symbolism without reading into things that may not be there?
So, I mean, that's a good question, and that came up in some of the episodes I did on symbolism, especially the episodes on Jung and Corbin, and especially Barfield. And that sort of unlimited semiotics that you worry about, I think, is a genuine concern. And so, the way I try to constrain it is I try to practice good cognitive science. I try to put any of the hermeneutics of symbolism and any theory of symbolism into a deep discussion, deep dialogue with sort of the best cognitive science we've got about aspects of cognition. And that's why, for example, I criticized Barfield's notion about evolution of consciousness because of his reading of symbolism in one way. And I said, well, we don't necessarily need his grand evolutionary model to explain why symbolism is so pervasive and profound in human cognition. We have alternative explanations that actually get sort of closer tracking to the empirical data, line up with already independently established cognitive processes and mechanisms. And so, I mean, I'm giving a long answer that actually just sort of vectors into, well, you practice good science, right?
Yeah.
Right? You make a plausibility argument. You try and afford new lines of empirical investigation. You connect it up. You format it in such a way that you can connect it up to a theoretical landscape in which it can enter into theoretical debate with other accounts. So one of the difficulties I have with some of the more standard things, like perhaps Jordan Peterson's take on Jung and Jungian symbolism, is that it tends to be very siloed. It needs to be brought into more discussion with alternative theories of symbolism, alternative accounts of how cognition and is working. That's why I even recommended that we bring in Corbin's view of the symbol and put it, because it was historically Corbin and Jung knew each other, and they were in discussion. That historical discussion and the theoretical interaction is there. It's a resource we should be making use of. Or Jonathan. I mean, Jonathan is astonishingly brilliant. Jonathan Pajot, but of course, and there's no Jonathan comes in from a Christian framework on the interpretation of quite a bit of the symbolism, and it's like, that's important, but we have a long Neoplatonic tradition of understanding symbolism that has also historically been in discussion and dialogue and debate with the Christian tradition. So we should be making use of those resources quite a bit more, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love Pajot's channel.
Oh, he's brilliant.
Yeah, he does a great job of explaining it in a very straightforward way, in a way that is relevant to people. And what I really enjoyed about watching his channel was that it took something that had this very negative feeling and like I had a very negative relationship with Christianity in my
Right.
childhood. And it kind of helped me to reframe that
Yeah.
and say that, like, maybe the interpretation that my parents had or that the church around me had was not the only interpretation of it.
I think that's, I mean, and I think Jordan Peterson did that also with his Jungian biblical series. And I think, I mean, I think what you just said is very important and deserves a lot more recognition. I think the work that Jonathan is doing about showing how deep a reading and deep a meaning we should give to symbolism and what he calls the symbolic world. I think that's convergent again with a lot of the people I explored it, especially towards the end of my series. And I mean, I got to have even a discussion with Thomas Cheetham, who is one of the, I think experts on Corban right now. So I think that ability to give people the kind of understanding of symbolism that reactivates and reaccesses for them a perspectival and participatory knowing so that they can get, as you said, a deep reframing. And I take it that you mean it's not just a cognitive reframing, but an existential reframing
Yeah.
toward Christianity and established religious traditions. I think that's just an important work. And Jonathan is especially doing it extremely well.
Yeah. And so I know there are a lot of people that have had similar experiences to the one I've had. All my siblings, I know. And a lot of people turn to Eastern traditions, which I like that you talk about Eastern traditions, but you also show that there are a lot of traditions in the West that people
Oh
can
yes,
turn to
yes, yes.
about problems of meaning in life.
Oh, very much. I think, I mean, and that's where my work is deeply convergent with Jonathan's work, and also with Paul's work, Paul Vanderklay, and also the work that Mary Cohen is doing. She's doing, and Jonathan is also in discussion with Paul and with Mary, and then also the work that Mary and I are doing with J.P. Marceau. So there's a bunch of us that are all trying to get people to remember that the West has a profound wisdom tradition to it that is as profound and as powerful as the East. We've lost touch with it for historical reasons that I talk about in my series. And we can get, by putting it into dialogue with the Eastern traditions, we can help to, you know, it's kind of like traveling out to the Eastern traditions. We can return back and better see our lost traditions
Yeah.
and how to take up the practices therein. Once again, I think yeah, I think that's very important. I think the work of Versluis on this, his work on the perennial philosophy, Platonic mysticism. He has a whole slew of books, and I just highly recommend them for people who want to seriously recover the Western wisdom tradition. His work is, I think, seminal and important. It needs to be read more widely.
Okay. Um, yeah. I'm also curious. Did you get a chance to see the Joker?
Yeah, and so I actually wrote. I'm on Letterwiki, where you get into public discussions with other people, and it's visible
Uh,
for a general audience. So David Chapman and I wrote a letter to him about Joker, and then what's happened is he and I have gone onto an ongoing discussion. I owe David a letter, um, uh, uh, and what we've discovered is just how deeply convergent his work is and mine. He's done a regular podcast and he talks about meaningness, and we're both talking about sort of meta rationality, just terrifically convergent. But yeah, I talked about Joker to him, and I don't want to say too much here, Zeke, because one of the first movies I'm going to actually do when I this Saturday is
okay.
is Joker, because one of the things that's in the letters and one of the things I want to talk about and then get Leo Ferraro and Anderson Todd's response to is how you in the Joker represents a shift, how we see a shift from the zombie as sort of a premier mythos of the meaning crisis, and the Joker represents instead this very sort of nasty kind of narcissistic take,
Yeah.
a mythological figure for the meaning crisis. And what does that mean about what's happening right now? So that's something I've explored a bit with David in print, and then I'm going to explore in on video. It's going to be, I think we're actually going to do a film, the stuff about minding media Joker first. Then we're going to do, I think, Arrival, and I think Blade Runner 2049. I think that's the first three
Okay.
things we're going to sort of film.
Yeah, that sounds great. I did want to get your take on it, but I guess we'll have to wait till till that video comes out.
Yeah,
I
if you
don't want
don't
to.
mind, I
Yeah.
don't mind whetting people's appetite for it.
Yeah, of course. I
And
don't want to
I
give it
also don't
away.
want. Yeah, well, and I also don't want to prejudice people too much, and because I mean, I'll be the initial presenter, but I want people also open to the way in which, Anderson and Leo are probably going to disagree with me and challenge and so forth.
Yeah, so definitely look forward to that. And you did mention that it was kind of a shift from the zombie to the Joker, and it does seem like recently there has been a shift away from the zombie, that it maybe has lost its potency a little
Yeah,
bit.
and Chris and I sort of predicted that that would happen because part of our argument in the zombie book was, I mean, there's still new movies being made and new series and
Yeah,
whatever.
but they don't
But
seem to have that same grip on people. Like,
yes,
yeah, I know the new Zombieland came out, and I don't think I don't hear anyone talking about it, or
yep,
there's just not as much as there used to be.
it's not grabbing the imagination. And Chris and Philip and I, and then more recently Chris and I, we argued that was sort of bound to happen precisely because, as we argued in the book, the zombie's a dead end symbol. Pun kind of intended, by the way. It's a dead
Yeah,
end symbol. It's a symbol that expresses but does not elucidate the meaning crisis. It expresses, but it does not guide a response. It's not like sort of the symbols you see within the religions that don't just express things. They elucidate, and then they also train. They educe. They draw forth. They educate you, right? They
yeah,
elucidate and educate. And the zombie doesn't do that with respect to the meaning crisis. It neither elucidates nor educates. And so we predicted that it would, in a sense, burn out. It was a dead end symbol, in a powerful kind of way. And so, yeah, I argued in the letters that I exchanged with David Chapman that the Joker the fact that the Joker caught so much attention. I mean, part of the credit just goes to Phoenix's astonishing performance in the
oh yeah,
direct. But part of it was also the way they played with an already established mythological figure and really, really, reoriented it towards sort of the way in which the meaning crisis is biting into people's lives, and how it's moving from kind of a collective vacancy to a very nasty individual kind of narcissism. And of course, that's reflected in our politics at large. That kind of, right, because if you think about it, the last ditch of meaning, if meaning is relevance realization, the last ditch place where you make a stand is, well, at least how things are relevant to me, and I want attention. The one direction of attention that I can still grasp at is everybody looking and paying attention to me. And
yeah,
this, of course, is a central feature, and the hunger in Joker, and then the way in which that hunger metamorphoses into something aggressive and almost like a craving for him. I think that's a very important change in our collective imagination, collective imaginary, as Thomas Bjorkman would say, that we need to slow down and pay very careful attention to. And that's what we're going to do when we do the
yeah.
Minding Media episode.
Okay, yeah, and I think that loss of power of the symbol of the zombie, I think, is actually hinted at in Shaun of the Dead,
Oh yes, very
which
much,
I
very
don't
much.
know when that came out, but I think it had to be at least 10 years ago or something like
Yeah.
that. But where so they have the apocalypse, and then at the end of the movie, everyone, like, all these people turn into a zombie, but then they're just living together, and he has his friend in the shed, and they're
Yeah,
just playing video games, and
yeah, yeah.
the friend tries to bite him, he just kind of shoos him away.
Yeah, so as the horror, I mean, this was part of the zombie narrative, though, that the horror gives gives way to a kind of indefinite nothingness, a kind of empty suburban voidness. I mean, that's what Shaun of the Dead shows, right? At the end,
Yeah.
right? The horror, it's not like there's no apocalypse in the sense of the revelation of a new way of being or how to fall in love with the depths of reality or how to, like, it ends in a kind of vapid a state. And that shift, I think that, well, I think we argued that the shift from horror to vapidity, I think, was something that was always imminent within the zombie mythos.
Yeah, I think that was also expressed in The Walking Dead. I
Yep.
think what kept people interested was the fact that they were always hinting at a cure.
Yeah.
And so they hint at it and then they don't get it and it doesn't work out. And then they hinting at it again. And then eventually you just kind of realize like there is going to be
No
nothing they
cure.
can do. It's going to continue forever.
And then the show also started to drift. It came to exemplify rather than portray the very
Yeah.
phenomenon, right? And the show has drifted. And I've actually stopped watching it,
Yeah. I think a lot of people have
along with a
because of
lot of
this reason.
people, because it was the realize, like I said, as the horror inevitably becomes vapidity, then people realize that the intensity of the expression of the meaning crisis in the symbol is not what they're actually hungering for. What they're hungering for is elucidation and education.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Anxiety has kind of been a topic I've addressed a lot on my channel.
Yeah.
And so after hearing you recommend it over and over again, I'm finally going through Tillich's Courage to Be,
Oh, excellent.
which
Masterpiece.
is, he points out that anxiety, our day-to-day anxieties, are just a symptom. And underneath that is the ultimate anxieties of
The
non-being,
existential anxiety. Yeah.
meaninglessness, and emptiness. And one of my favorite examples of that is T.S. Eliot and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock,
Prufrock,
which
yes, yeah.
follows this guy Prufrock who's kind of lame and boring, and he's trying to work up courage to talk to this woman at a party. And every time he thinks of asking her out, he thinks of his bald head and his skinny arms,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then he keeps putting it off. And throughout the poem, he keeps repeating that there will be time. Like he can
Yeah.
keep putting it off because there will always be time to do it later. And time is this phrase that gets repeated over and over again.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so
Yep.
as the poem progresses, his anxiety shifts from the woman. Like at the end, he's not even worried about the woman. He's worried about like eating a peach and like how to
Eating a
comb his hair
peach.
over. And it
Yeah.
shifts to his inability to his how time is slipping away and he's
Yeah.
repeatedly failed to act.
Yeah, I mean, it's a masterpiece poem. I
Yeah.
often find myself quoting, in the room, women come and go, speaking of Michelangelo,
Yeah,
right?
that's one of my favorite lines. Yeah, he has some other good lines where he's like, I measure my life in coffee spoons. Like some
Yeah,
really
yeah,
good
yeah, yeah,
one-liners in there.
yeah. I think that's right, and that points towards the work of Hahn in like books like The Scent of Time, and we feel simultaneously rushed. We can't linger, but we also feel that for all this rushing, we're getting nowhere. It doesn't build up. He talks about time doesn't flow anymore. It's atomized. It just buzzes and whirs, um, and I think that change in our experience of time, which of course is an experience of our own identity, because our identities are inherently temporal in nature. That's Heidegger's great point, right? In being in time. As that we get that sort of fundamental change in our phenomenology of time, I think it's reflecting something that Eliot's poem was portending, which is we're going to more and more experience the meaning crisis in the woof and the fiber of our day-to-day existence in ways that our people are going to find, and it's going to trigger it's going to trigger a kind of existential anxiety precisely because there isn't a specific threat, there isn't a specific problem. It's more this general mood of malaise, of the fabric that sort of bound us into things and bound us to ourselves is fraying in ways we don't really understand. And so I think that poem points to that emergent phenomena very, very powerfully.
Yeah, and that is also a point you make that fear has a definite object. Like you can
Yes,
point
yes.
to that thing that's going to kill you and say, "I'm afraid of that. I just get away
Yeah.
from that thing." But anxiety, it doesn't have a definite object. You're not sure what it is. It's just this underlying feeling.
Yeah, it's a general sense of sort of conflict with oneself at sort of deeper primordial levels. That something's going wrong. The connection, Shakespeare's idea of the time being out of joint, to bring back another temporal metaphor,
Hmm.
right? That yeah, like I say, it's much more of a mood and a sense of ominous presence, right? But also simultaneously a kind of vacuity, rather than it is a focal object towards which you can direct specific action. And that's what ultimately makes it so self-perpetuating. The fact that people get this sort of penumbral sense of the presence of this, but there's nothing that they can point to or put their finger on. It actually increases its uncanniness, and
Yeah,
so it sort of starts to loop for people more and more that way. Yes, very much.
yeah, yeah. And that was the work of who again? Did you mention in the
Which
beginning about time?
The Scent of Time by Han.
Oh,
He's a
by Han.
Korean
Okay.
philosopher. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent book. He also wrote The Agony of Eros, The Transparent Society, The Burnout Society. Highly recommend his work.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. And so I remember you mentioning before that there was some follow-up books on the zombies in Western civilization.
Yep,
Is there
yep.
any updates on that?
Yeah, so there's two things happening. One, if you promote it, that'd be really wonderful. So I'm working on a book with Daniel Craig right now called The Cognitive Continuum, which takes the one of the core arguments running through the series about how there's a continuum from insight through to flow, through to mystical experience, transformative experience, all the way up to enlightenment. And Daniel and I are working on that book right now. We have an Indiegogo campaign. Just to be
Oh, okay.
clear, I'm not getting any money from this campaign. No income for me at all. No income from the book. The money that was being raised is to go into production of the book and to help support Daniel, who is a poor student, as he works on this project. So that's definitely underway. I'm working with Madeline Abramian right now, and we are together transcribing all of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and that's going to be released as a book.
Oh, awesome.
And we'll supplement it with, of course, visual material and diagrams and some appendix talks that help make clear some of the main lectures within Awakening. And then Chris Mastropietro and I are busy writing the follow-up book to the zombies, which is Unsheltered, the genealogy of the meaning crisis. But Chris and I have been sort of waylaid because we worked on a long chapter on Socratic dialogue for a meta modern reader. Hopefully, it's going to come out in that reader, um, and we're also working on an article for an online journal. And so that has sort of slowed us down with the work on Unsheltered. But that work is also going to be taken up in full force in a couple of weeks.
Okay, that all sounds amazing. It sounds like it will be very busy, but I
No,
can't
no,
wait to check that all out. It was so
I'm
funny. Oh, yeah.
too busy in some ways. But go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah,
you.
no, it was just so funny that when the original Buddhism and cognitive science lectures came out, I watched them very quickly, and then I was just like, I need to find more material like this, and then now there's so much that I can't keep up with it. So that
Well,
is a good problem to have.
that's a good yeah, that is a good problem to have. Yeah, I've been very fortunate, and I'm very grateful for the way things have sort of gelled and turned out. I'm deeply appreciative of that, and I'm thankful for all the people, you included, who helped me along the way.
Of course, yeah. So yeah, congrats on your audience growing. Congrats on tenure, and yeah, is there anything else you want to promote or mention?
Um, Uh, Not right now that I can think of. I mean, there's some excellent stuff, like I said, that's going to be coming out in Rebel Wisdom. They've got a really interesting. Ari's doing some really, and David are doing some really interesting work. They've got a video called "Lost Ways of Knowing," and then they've got a series building around that. I recommend that. I think it's really some really excellent work. Um, yeah, I think that's it. I've sort of mentioned all the work I'm doing on the minding media, The unnamed series, we haven't named it yet on this dialogue about science and spirituality today. And then after Socrates, those are those, and then the books, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, The Cognitive Continuum with its Indiegogo campaign, and Unsheltered. That's all in the pipe. So that's all there. That's all
Awesome.
there. It's all coming.
Sounds great. Well, yeah. Thank you for joining me again, John. Another great talk. And
Yeah.
yeah, always look forward to speaking with you.
Thank you, Zeke.